Okay, everyone. I've graded all.
To the Google Home app.
I've graded all of the Unit 3 exams. Um, Always check my work for errors. The multiple choice scores I just drag over from AP Classroom, so you can log into AP Classroom and make sure that I counted that score correctly. Then the free response, I use an editing tool on your submission that shows you a little number one whenever you said something that was on my key. There's a few other comments like show your work, use full sentences, be more specific, wrong word, and does not answer question. Sometimes there's no comment. That means you were on the right track. You just didn't answer something which was on the answer key. Always check my work. Maybe I didn't count your points correctly, or maybe I didn't enter the right thing into the box, or maybe I didn't do the math right. Remember, your multiple choice score is recorded out of a denominator which is irrelevant. Ditto your free response score. So you can see three columns. Your multiple choice score, the letter grade is irrelevant, just the number. Your free response score, the letter grade is irrelevant. It's just that the number equals what's in your submission. And then your total, that is relevant. Your total is multiple choice plus double the free response. And then whatever number you got, 113241 is divided out of 36 for your percentage. The high score on this test, I think, was a 41. And I think that there were two of those, one in each period, if I remember correctly. There may have been higher. I actually don't. I think I'm just going off the top of my head on that. But remember that I always throw out the freakish 3 or 4 best students per class. And then I set the curve at about the 90th percentile. So you only have to do as well as a 90% of perfection. You don't have to be graded against the absolute best answers. Overall, I thought the grade distribution was really excellent. Most students are doing well on these tests. You're doing better on multiple choice than on free response. There's a lot of you are triggering our copy detection software, but that's only because you copy the question into your answer. If it helps you, that's okay, but you don't need to do that. It sets off a big alarm. A number of you will copy the entire question and then break it up to put your answers in it. If that helps you, fine, but that's the only cheating that we're seeing. The only triggers we got were false alarm about cheating, so thank you for not cheating. There were a couple of questions on this test that really stumped students. I think it's maybe my fault, and so the curve kind of threw those out. There were so few students that understood what I was asking that the curve essentially removes those questions. There were 45 possible points on the exam, but the curve was set at 36, which I think is fairly generous. In the multiple choice, I'd say most students did really well. There's always like a couple, right? Like everybody has a bad day. Perfection on multiple choice is extremely rare, but the scores on average were pretty solid. There was a question about possible methods to control exotic species, and it's one of those 1, 2, 3, 1 and 3, 1 and 2, 1, 2, 3, whatever. That format of question is always a stumper. And in that question, there was a word that may have confused some students about how bilge is relevant to invasive species. If you want, you should Google the spread of invasive starfish or invasive mussels. It explains how bilge is relevant. This is what I mean, that the College Board will ask you extremely specific questions, and if you don't know the story of invasive mussels, you might not know that word. It's also a plain English word. It's the stuff at the bottom of a boat. The bilge is the area where things spill inside of the boat. It's the very, very bottom. There was a calculation question which really messed up my students, and I was a little frustrated because it was directly from class. Right around half my students got this one question wrong about how to calculate gross productivity, net productivity, total productivity, whatever. That was like on the first or second day of the unit. I was bummed that so few of you got that one right. Also, I was really frustrated by a couple of things that came up in the biomes lecture that I did. And it gives me the impression that a lot of you didn't watch it. But about how tropical rainforests have very low nutrient levels in the soil. Almost half my students got that one wrong. And there were two questions that ask you to place biomes on a map. And the fact that Russia has a whole bunch of conifer forest, and that like the colonial part of the United States, the Northeast, has a whole bunch of deciduous forest. That biome mapping seemed to be tricky for students. Also, the second law of thermodynamics, I'll warn you that I've seen this question stump students throughout the year. I've used it before in the energy unit. I've noticed that the College Board will often ask a question roughly like this one, almost word for word. And that question seems to have low success rates nationwide. So definitely review that one question. Go to AP Classroom. About half of you got it wrong. Look for the second law of thermodynamics question. Try to pick that one apart. Ask me if you want. And then in the free response, A and B were almost across the board accessible. Some kids made a mistake because they were distracted or they didn't write it correctly. I can tell that some of you struggle to put your words down. But they were pretty straightforward. A was asking about an endangered species and why it's endangered. You did an assignment about that. And B was asking about general characteristics of species likely to become endangered, and that was a big part of an extinction lecture I gave. Happy to see those. Now, C was asking about arguments for protecting biodiversity, and this ties back to a previous unit. And a lot of you gave a general, not wrong, but not very relevant or vague answer. Like, biodiversity is better for food webs. And you're not wrong. That's just not specific enough. You're not saying, you know, like, why would that actually matter unless you said, oh, and then we get our food from healthy food webs, or healthier ecosystems provide water filtration or air quality improvements. That is an actual argument because you have some benefit to someone or something. C was, you know, kind of the stumper. And D, I think I just phrased it wrong. There were a few kids who I think they could tell what I was asking. I wanted to know what characteristics make some parts of the planet more diverse than others. You know, some ecosystems have very low diversity, like the tundra has very few species. Whereas some parts of the planet, like tropical reef or tropical rainforest, have extreme biodiversity. And I was digging for why. Here's your free point. Everybody can do this on the correction. Get ready to write this down. If you have high productivity and a really consistent environment, you will have very high biodiversity. So our coastline, coral reefs, tropical rainforest have high productivity and they have very high biodiversity. Now, speaking of corrections, you have until the next exam. The only requirement is that you have completed all the homework in that unit. So you can't do corrections if you didn't do the basic work. You can always turn in that work late, and that makes you eligible for the correction. And all of your corrections have to follow this format. Tell me what question you're talking about. Like the multiple choice is different in some of your exams, but either way, just use that number or which letter in the free response you're answering. Then tell me what you said that was wrong, then what you believe to be correct, and where in the course you had that information. I'm forcing you to go look through your notes. You need that anchor point so that your memory will find the right information in the future. So I'm okay giving you a half point because you're helping your memory find correct information later when you need it. And I get a lot of requests like, when is my correction going in? Hey, I did it. I want to know how much to study for the next exam or whatever. And that's kind of the wrong strategy because I always grade at the end of a unit. And I kind of have this specific cycle. I'll grade all the homeworks, then I'll grade the exam, and then after the exam, like now I'm going to go back to do the exam number 2 corrections, and then I'll get all the emailed stuff, late work, all that last. So usually you'll see this rhythm here. Okay, I think we're good. Overall, really impressive results. You know, you don't have a lot of exams. So you've only taken 2 previous exams. So this one could swing your average really far. I've had kids who got an A, but their grade went down because they had a less good A than last time. You know, you only had a couple of exams so far. So whatever you got now can cause a big swing. By the end of the semester, you'll average out around a grade with less dynamic changes. So don't stress out. Bring me all your questions. Any